All right. Calling to order the meeting of the Active Recreation Assets Working Group for Monday, March 13th. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about off-leash dog programs, and I just want to start with a couple of reminders for everyone. Well, first we're going to start with intros. I remember that. But before we even get to that, so that we can launch right into things afterwards, I want to remind everyone that our decisions are our decisions here made with this working group are recommendations only. There are recommendations made to the property holders of the various places that we're discussing for various activities. And they are only recommendations. Those bodies then will vote and make final decisions regarding the properties that we're discussing. So just want to make that clear. Also, that ultimately the decision to allow off-leash dogs spaces and times resides with the select board, who is under whose jurisdiction that bylaw stands. So we are lucky enough to be joined today by Lieutenant John McGrath. Oh, sure, sorry. Also, this is we have a bunch of folks in attendance today, but this is not an actual public hearing. It's just a public meeting. So we are lucky today to be joined by Needham Police Department Lieutenant John McGrath, who's going to have some discussion of the off-leash dog program from the point of view of the police department. And that's where we'll start. Oh, actually, I guess we're going to start with. Why don't we start with? We'll start with the lieutenant. Yeah. But first, let's just go around for the minutes and for everyone who's watching. To introduce ourselves, I'm Heidi Frail. I'm from the select board.
Matt Borelli, member of the select board.
Katie Kang, Assistant Town Manager in Operations.
John McGrath, Police Department.
Frederica Lalonde, Parks and Rec.
Stacy Mulder, Partner Rec Director. Sarah Natasha, Community Member at Large.
Susan Welby, CBC representative.
Okay, great. So I guess with that,
John.
oh, and John, sorry,
Hi, everyone. John Conley from the Finance Committee.
and Ed, I guess we're waiting. Okay, so we'll announce him when he comes. So I guess we can,
Yeah,
just turn it right over to you. Okay.
Sure, and I apologize for having my back here, but I'll try and do my best to engage with the people behind me as well. I guess I've been here to give a perspective on the calls for service we get at the police department regarding dogs, and that's exactly what I'll do. I'll give you a little bit of context. My own personal side of it. I'm a dog owner myself. I own a three-year-old golden retriever and a 1-year-old Aussie who is very energetic and loves to run around. So I am a dog owner. I love dogs, but I'm also want to give the police side of it from, like I said, calls for service. So we have 3 categories in which we kind of log calls for service at the police department. There's off-leash checks, which are calls that are initiated by an officer or by the animal control officer. We have town bylaw violations, which can fit a multitude of things from dumping leaves illegally to noise violations to dog calls. And then we have a specific category for dog calls, and that's where I kind of focused my attention on. I pulled from January 2022 to January 2023, and we had 224 dog calls. I'd say the majority of these calls were loose dog calls. That's calls we went to in a neighborhood where a dog got free from an electric fence. Somebody reported it running in and out of traffic, that type of thing. So that was that response. Then in the summer months, you have dogs left in cars, things to that regard. And then more to where we're talking about in this group, off-leash dogs. What I wanted to, I pulled a few narratives from calls, what we're seeing from these groups that do call into the police department and concerns. I'll just read from a couple of our narratives. Cricket Field Call reports a man walking a dog off leash and dog attacking and almost biting her daughter. Claxton Field, reports loose dog running into and out of traffic in the area of Claxton Field. Dog walker with 8 to 10 dogs who are constantly off leash and causing disturbances at town forest. I don't know what that's my other one. Call reports that she just had a verbal disagreement with a female dog walker in the town forest, all off leash and acting aggressively. 911 caller reports an off-leash golden retriever was aggressive to her and her dog. It's at High Rock Woods, Claxton Field. That's just a small snapshot. I understand there's a interest of having off-leash dogs in some of these particular areas, which I highlighted. I don't think you're necessarily going to see a group come forth to say, please, let's have dogs on leashes, because there's already a town bylaw in place. But these are some of the calls that we see and respond to that are coming in from concerned citizens directly to us involving off-leash dogs. My concern is that with an off-leash dog program in these particular areas, you might see an even greater influx of those calls of service to us, hampering our ability to respond to other calls for service. And also, and from an enforcement side, it's difficult. Are we going into the middle of the town force to try and track these people down? How are we doing that? But just that's the quick snapshot from the police department, the calls for service we are receiving, and that's my quick snapshot for it.
And Ed Olson has joined us now, and so thank you, Lieutenant. So perhaps we can come to you, Ed, and hear from you regarding Parks and Forestry.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate this conversation tonight. From Parks and Forestry, I always try to focus in on the why first and then try to answer some questions afterwards. But I think what I'm hearing is people want more options. We have a dog park, an off-leash dog park that we've spent a lot of time creating for the public. And what I'm hearing is people want more options out there. So I'm fine with this conversation. I think it's good, but I do have some reservations, like we just heard with Lieutenant McGrath. Not everybody has a dog. So is it fair and equitable to use town space for just dogs? So I just want to raise that point. Right now, as you heard from the police department, we have issues right now with off-leash dogs, some disregard for current rules and procedures and policies. And I wonder if creating another off-leash dog area is going to actually help that, or if it's going to just exacerbate the problem. Public safety, again, if we do create these spaces, I just want to make sure we have rules and regulations. The Board of Health is involved. When I say Board of Health, I think about people like myself that are townspeople that don't have dogs. And if we were to go to a park and one of my kids were to get bit, again, are these dogs licensed? Are they vaccinated? Are things safe? Speaking of safety, again, do we want to contain these dog areas? Do we want to have fencing? Who's going to be monitoring these areas? Unfortunately, Parks and Forestry has to maintain all the open space in town. So we're fine with rules and regulations. We just want to know how it's going to affect our operating budget and our operations for monitoring. Oftentimes we make rules and regulations, but we're the ones that have to enforce these rules. When someone's off leash at a park and we're out there weed whacking or cutting, we're the first person that comes in contact with these dog owners. And it's a difficult place to be to inform them that they have to be on leash. Usually we're met with opposition and anger. And sometimes people get angry with us and yell, and occasionally we have to call the police department. So it's an uncomfortable place for our staff to be in. So I just want to make sure there's some parameters for us to work within that environment. Maintenance, we created an off-leash dog park. Very proud of what we accomplished up there. But if we have others, again, we gotta talk about the financial impacts, the budget. The expectations. I think a big thing about what I want to hear is if we do create these spaces, what are the expectations out there from the public? Hours of operation. When can maintenance activities occur? One of the predicaments we always are in are, when can we maintain these spaces? If they're open 24/7 and people out there with dogs off leash, how do we bring mowers and weed whackers and trimmers and our people in there in a safe time to maintain these spaces for the public? Trash receptacles. Obviously, if we create these spaces, we're going to need to provide a trash receptacle. That's going to mean staff hours. Offensive odors. Usually trash receptacles at off-leash dog parks are just poop bags, and those trash barrels get hot and steamy in the summertime, and it's quite offensive for people. And of course, if we add trash receptacles, we'll have to talk about illegal dumping. Anytime we put a parks barrel, we tend to see citizens go out there with illegal dumping bags, and those barrels become not what they were intended for. And then I'd just like to add tonight is, what spaces should be considered and what are off limits, are school grounds off limits. Obviously, we've heard from the police department, and oftentimes these off-leash dogs are on school grounds during school hours, and that's a predicament that we have to be mindful of. Oftentimes these dogs are in tot lots or playgrounds or basketball or tennis courts. Is that appropriate? And my last 2 points would be parking. Again, if we create a space, I think I've recommended in past meetings that maybe Mills Field, the open passive recreation side of Mills, would be a place to accommodate this request. But again, if we advertise this, we got to have parking for people. And then lastly, who do we propose uses these parks? You can't really put a line in the sand. What we found with Mills Field currently is there is a lot of Needham residents that come over the town line and they let their dogs kind of free inside the baseball field. That's not really fair. So again, I think those are the few points that we'd like to make for Parks and Forestry. And lastly, I think what we saw with the letter from the resident just today is when people don't pick up after the dogs, it's quite offensive. And when people have to walk through those things or mow through those things or track those things home, it's not nice. So as a person that's a frontline staff member that would have to deal with these areas, I just want to be mindful of that as well. Thank you all. I appreciate this conversation. I know it's a long time coming, and I think it's going to be a good conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, and before we move along, we're gonna hear from Katie King, who has some feedback, I think, from some of her contemporaries in other towns.
Thank you. So 2 of the programs that we have heard about from the public hearing, for people who are looking at programs they wanted us to model, we heard about Brookline and Newton. So I reached out to both of them to talk to the people that oversee those programs to just get a sense, how's it going? So I'll just talk through kind of program overview, their staffing, the challenges they're facing, and what the future discussions are in those communities. So for Newton, they have 7 locations, 3 are fenced in, and they all are subsections of much larger parks that they've been able to designate. Before they launched each site, Newton did both a neighborhood level meeting and a citywide meeting and got feedback on hours. Did they want fencing? Did they not? A lot of the things that Eddie was touching on. And the honest feedback was that nearly every site had very mixed community feedback. So there was never like very clear consensus, but enough interest that clearly Newton chose to move forward. In terms of staffing, their Park and Rec operation hired a part-time off-leash specialist that is funded with fees from the off-leash program. It's in a revolving fund. It's enough to support a part-time person. They have enough work for a full-time person, but the resources would not support that.
Sorry, can I just ask?
Yeah.
What is a
Leash specialist. So in Needham, in Newton and in Brookline, which is the same here in town, the ability to write an enforcement ticket is with each police department. And so what the Park and Rec enforcement arm, I'm doing quotes, looks like is basically telling people, you haven't signed up for the program, go see the city clerk's office and sign up. There's no real hard enforcement. Because that is with the animal control officers in each police department. So in Newton, this one person who's only 20 hours a week goes across those 7 parks at an ad hoc schedule and tries to check, do they have the tags that they need to have? And one of the challenges that they identified is professional dog walking companies bringing many dogs with not enough staff. They have in their program rules a 3-to-1 ratio dogs to human. That is often something that they find is violated. And so the dog walking companies will go from one park to the next, and the off-leash specialist is kind of chasing them around. So it seems like something they have not been able to really get a handle on yet. Newton also had to hire a contracted waste management service to come around once or twice a week to do the waste barrels. I'd say this is in context to, we are all seeing an increased amount of trash since COVID in our open spaces. So dog waste is not the only trash, it is just adding to a growing problem. The key challenges, I already mentioned, the Park and Rec staff person doesn't have the ability to write tickets, and there is only one person who can, so enforcement is limited. Waste. Newton is seeing a lot of non-residents use their parks, I think because they have this program, when a lot of neighboring communities don't necessarily. And again, the professional dog walkers. In terms of future discussions, they're talking about an additional off-leash area in West Newton. That's one of their villages that isn't served currently, and they're talking about doing a fenced-in one. And they also have started to have more and more requests for differentiating space by dog size, so that there is a small dog park and a large dog park. So that's what's going on in Newton. In Brookline, they have 14 locations. None of them are kind of pure dog parks. And that was a conscious decision. They had, it sounded like at least 2 townwide discussions about did they want to dedicate space to a true dog park, because those conversations concluded that they have such limited open space, they didn't want to dedicate acreage just for a formal dog park, and so they went with the shared use model. So all of their dog areas are shared use spaces, and the feedback was very much that at the spaces that are also athletic facilities, that is where it has the most challenge for them. The spaces where there aren't athletic facilities work the best. So the example that was given was Lars Anderson has this huge hill, like a sloping hill. They don't program that space. There's not team sports played on it. That's the best site that they have and the fewest conflicts from a town operational perspective. I will note in Brookline, their trails and their conservation areas don't allow dogs at all, leashed or not, which is different than here in Needham. They can be leashed. Brookline, in terms of staffing, in their kind of Park and Rec staff, they have a full-time park ranger, but this is one of many of that person's roles. So I'd say when they're going around checking permits and checking field usage, they're also checking on off-leash dogs. So it's just an additive task. And they also have an admin staff person, and it sounded like because the town clerk's office doesn't have a lot of capacity, it's a Park and Rec admin person doing the oversight of signage and licensure and paperwork and such. This is not funded by the fees. A lot of this is subsidized through their operating budget. And challenges, again, for them, it's waste. They had particularly a challenge with people throwing the dog waste into the recycling bins because they were open containers as opposed to big barrels. So it was easier to throw it in. So they were having contamination of their recycling stream. So they've had to get specific dog waste barrels to try to clean up the recycling. The biggest feedback I got from Brookline is what Eddie said around expectations. there's a huge mismatch between people who are calling, looking for enforcement and the town's ability to actually meet that request. So I think, it's a point for discussion. And future discussions in Brookline, the town is at very early stages of revisiting if they want a dedicated dog park. And if the answer is yes, it would be paired with a discussion about, do they take the athletic fields out of the green dog program? So again, kind of putting the right use with the right space. So, it's interesting, I think. Both of these communities chose to do it, right? So there's clearly enough interest that they wanted to do these programs. They both are facing some very obvious challenges that there's not like an easy fix for, so.
And do you know how long these programs have been operating?
I don't offhand, sorry.
Yeah.
Like pre-COVID.
Okay, all right. That's, yeah.
And are there any hours limits?
They vary by park, so some I saw were like dawn to dusk, others were, you couldn't go out until 9 AM on weekdays. And I heard anecdotally that particular neighborhood was worried about the noise in the mornings, so I think they vary in both communities, so.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think we were talking about structuring this discussion in sort of two parts. The first, is this a policy that we want to recommend? So a discussion of the policy, how, and to that end, I think we were gonna make Katie was gonna facilitate doing a pros and cons list.
Note-taking function.
Yes. So that we can kind of tot up what the benefits and drawbacks might be. And then come to a vote and a decision on whether or not we're going to recommend this policy. And then once that vote is taken, if we vote that we do want to recommend this policy, then we'll talk about discussion of times and places. So we're gonna try to keep those two things separate and then make a recommendation for those. Stacy, did you have a question?
I had a recommendation, can we do a pros and cons list both for doing the off leash and for not doing, like, what are the pros of not changing things, or what are the cons of not changing it, as well as changing it and not.
Yeah, I think that's fine, yeah. I would just say, Madam Chair, as we move forward, again, we talked about the policy being with the select board, so I guess if we decide that we don't want to move forward, but still, in the alternative, give recommendations, just in case the board said, thanks for the recommendation, but this is something we really want to do for the community, so just to kind of have that out there in case there's a difference of opinion from this recommendation, which isn't binding. But I just had a overall thought, and then we can get into the pros and cons. And then something for Katie. Are there any, you think about reserving a field, you have a league, baseball league or a flag football league. And you form the league like a nonprofit, and then you say, okay, we want to have some field time with this league. Are there any communities that kind of have a dog, almost like a known group, member group, let's say it's a nonprofit, and then the town makes it available, okay, we're gonna make this area available, but we know who the users are and who's responsible in case they leave and there's trash there, or there's excessive noise. I didn't know if that's been done. So I think a lot of the concern to me, and we've all been on the different fields and off leash, even though they're not supposed to be off leash. Memorial Park, just go there every Sunday during the fall. So it's that kind of controlling this at the beginning, and I didn't know if that's ever been thought of.
A good question. So Newton and Brookline both chose administratively to set up kind of the oversight of the program, where because you have to go to the city clerk under state or town clerk under state law to license your dog annually, they attach the off leash sign up to that. To your question about like an outside group, in Newton, it sounded like they have like a Facebook group, an Instagram group of these users, but it's not, it's more like to help them build the community and almost advocacy for additional spaces, as opposed to like you are responsible for the permit in the way that flag
Then you
football
go back.
or, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I don't think it's happening, but it's an interesting
Yeah,
idea.
just a thought of, the way to get some type of control over,
Then you can publicize you could reserve it in advance, publicize the time,
right,
and then you sort of hold that.
on that time, like you would with any sports group, but just a thought. I was thinking
But
this week.
I do think it's nice that they would have a responsible party to
Right.
go to.
Certain hours they can use, it. Okay.
Can I ask them a question? Yes, and then I need some comment.
Pros or cons? There it is, on the list.
I'm like, I don't know.
So my first question, in terms of the issues that you're finding through this department. Is there a way to know whether most of them are resident, non-resident, a mix?
So that comes in, yes, if you've identified the person. We're getting, that's mixed results, so some people are refusing to identify themselves to particularly the animal control officer. Officers who respond get a little bit more of a compliance, then there's. So typically, yes, by identifying the individual, if they've left before that, no. And it's not something you really run somebody's license plate for to obtain that information. I know one particular individual that keeps coming up, and I think Katie referenced it, it's a dog walker that kind of goes from place to place. Know where she lives, but I think. It's been mixed if she identifies herself or not. But yeah, that's how we're doing.
Okay. And in terms of the loose dogs off leash, are they typically like the issues that you're running into? Are they dogs that like escaped or dogs that owners are there and just not?
No, I think the majority of those ones are like, they've left their home property. There were a couple around a field, but the narrative in the call, I couldn't really just figure out if it was on a field or not. But I'd say for the majority of those calls, it's come from somebody's home.
Okay, so that's very different than what we're talking about here, because those are just dogs, like, even if we had the most stringent leash laws, that would
Yeah,
be
you
a
couldn't,
completely different
right.
situation. Then. Okay. For the record, I don't love it when dogs approach me, even though you're not getting dogs, but it's okay. So I'm not speaking from someone that's like, oh, well, the dogs should roam free. But I do appreciate that there are people who value that, and so trying to come up with a solution would be, I think, awesome. So one thing that I wanted to say with regard to all these, like infractions, people who break the rules, whether there are, like, again, we have people breaking rules now. And so, and I think the people who will follow the rules, maybe we'll see an increase in whatever, like off leash dogs. For those people, because the rule followers will follow them correctly. One thing that I thought about, and kind of along Matt's point that I had brought up a while ago, was this idea of like a citizens commission from like of dog owners who are fully invested in having this program work, who would then police this program for the town. And I feel like anyone who's that invested in seeing something work will actually be more stringent about making sure that the people involved are following the rules. They'd be responsible for checking the fields, making sure waste isn't left behind. Also, I don't understand why we need to have trash cans. That's gross. Like, they should just take it with them, right? Isn't that what people like bring your baggie?
Well, yeah, but if you don't leave the trash can, they don't.
But if you leave with poop, then the commission would have to clean it up. So it would be like, you see what I'm saying? I mean, I'm just,
Yeah.
kind of brainstorming as I talk here, but thinking through having the most invested people police their group. And then in terms of like financing it, having the dog owners find a way to possibly, like those who want it, like if we want fences or what have you, like figure out a way to make it work for the people who most want it. Policed by the people who most want it under some kind of commission. I guess it'd be under select board, right? So it'd be managed by the select board or whatever. Or whatever, like you're giving me a look like that. I got it. One more thing. But I think there's ways to do that and also then have signage so everyone knows when they're allowed and when they're not allowed, like especially like if you're bringing kids. I also agree that anything on playgrounds, that would be appropriate all because kids like, it's too much of a risk, but I think other places, I think it's really possible to do in a way that does not tax the town from a financial standpoint or from a staffing standpoint. I don't know, those are my thoughts. Those are all.
Anyone else?
Since I'm probably the only dog owner in the group, and I've been the most vocal about addressing this issue, because I think during our public hearing, we heard from quite a few people who were really interested in off-leash areas. So I put down a few notes. I'll read through it. It might cross the pros and cons barrier, but you'll have all my thoughts as we go along. Okay. The big thing is other cities and towns beyond Newton and Brookline have the ability to do off-leash. Boston Common has an off-leash area, and they do have a group that controls it. Dover has no leash law. They just ask people to be good citizens. Wellesley has a leash law if you're on sidewalks or streets, but in their parks and whatever, there's no leash law. What they require is dogs. Owners have their dogs under control by police, which is a reasonable request. Right now in Needham, there's 2 off-leash areas, the dog park and the trustees' property on the peninsula. There are some gate restrictions on the peninsula property, but it is off-leash. So the hope is to have places where people can take their dogs off-leash close to where they live. Have set hours when off-leash is allowed. The intent is not to have dogs running around all hours of the day. When I was a kid, open the door and sent the dog out. Every couple of hours, you'd whistle, the dog would come. I don't think we want that, but I think having the ability to have responsible dog owners is good. Hours of operation, my recommendation would be early in the morning until like 7:30 a.m. around schools, and then maybe 9 or 10 in some other non-school locations. And then consider extending hours at different times of the year when no organized activities are happening. Late afternoon, early evening. Dog owners have to respect field use for organized activities and not allow their dogs off leash near these activities. Recognize that off leash requires responsible dog owners who understand not everybody is comfortable around dogs. Keep their dogs from approaching strangers uninvited. Anticipate possible situations that could trigger anxiety in both a person and a dog. Train your dog to respond to voice commands. Try to control where dogs will leave themselves and always pick up the poop. Control barking. Barking dogs can create anxiety. Some people cannot distinguish between play barks and anxiety barks, so dog owners need to be respectful. We'll list places to suggest, we'll get to that later. But as far as dog parks are, not everybody likes a dog park. All dogs cannot go to a dog park. It doesn't work for them. But for some dog people, they need a dog park because they want to control where the dogs go. There is a grant program. It's called the Stand Grant. I don't know if Needham would be interested. They have some restrictions around it, but if you apply and are granted the money, they will pay for 90 to 95% of the dog. And then I think upgrading our existing dog park would make it more appealing to people. And also, you know, right now, dogs are allowed anywhere in Needham except for on the Phase Zero Memorial Park. They're there, they're walking, and you know, we want people to be respectful dog owners, no matter if they're on leash or off leash. That's my 2 cents, and if you want locations, I can make recommendations on locations.
I think what we're seeing from the police department's perspective, and what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, but the 2 places that they're being told not to go, people are going and they're they're sending the dogs off leash. And we're getting the calls that these dogs are off leash in areas that they're already not supposed to go. We're enforcing or attempting to enforce it, and people are still scoffing at it. So you could have the best intentions and say that the responsible dog owners, which I'm sure 90% or greater are being responsible. But it's the few that aren't, and you can put all these rules in place, but there are people that are not gonna follow these rules, as we're already seeing. And we're just gonna continue responding to the verbal arguments between a friendly dog, non-friendly dog. It's supposed to be on voice recall, but the dog ignored it this time. I'm just concerned about other communities not having it, that you have to police each and own individual. Well, I'm not gonna, you can't get people to license their dogs right now. So to now have to go to the town clerk's office and get a permit to have it off leash. And then have us trying to enforce that, I just think people aren't following the rules as they are now.
But if the majority of dog owners are following the rules, can't we reward those people to let them have good dogs off leash getting exercise? Or do
I guess
we punish everybody because a couple of people have not following the rules?
I guess I'd want to just say that as much as I am a rule follower, and I like it when other people follow the rules too. But I think that in this situation, we know they're already not following the rules. I think that's maybe not something that we can wrap our arms around in this particular venue. I wonder if what we should be talking about is, the possibility of transitioning some of those folks to places where it is permissible, if we decide that that's something we want to happen, and how that would work rather. And hope, I mean, this would be, first of all, I think that we were talking about this as a pilot, or at least recommendation that it would be a pilot, like a test. But not a permanent situation, because we don't kind of know what the effect will be, but one would hope that the effect would be to move some of this unenforceable behavior into a zone where it hopefully doesn't need as much enforcement, because people are following our, the new rules that we would put in place. But either way, I think it's absolutely true that people are going to break the rules regardless. But I'd love for us to try and focus on how we can best solve for the unmet need that we know exists in a certain positive manner.
To your point about policing, speaking just for myself, having Susan come yell at me about having my dog in a place where I'm not supposed to would be far scarier than you coming up to me and telling me that I did it wrong. Because no, but seriously, people like, you got people to do stuff for starters, but that's not that. Again, like when your peer group reprimands you, you're far more likely to be like, oh shoot, sorry. And then there's always gonna be outliers, but I think again, it's not gonna necessarily overtax the police or whatever other departments. I think if there's a way that we get a citizens group to monitor it, it could be really successful. And again, like Susan wants this. She doesn't want anyone screwing it up for her and for, Bill and for everybody else who wants to do it. So she's gonna be on top of it day in and day out. Because you have other responsibilities, but this might be her life's journey, right? To stand at the field and make sure no one left food, no one did this, like the people are, you know what I mean? Like it could be.
It's only when I'm there, I'm yelling at people, I'm not gonna go.
But I think if you were on this commission, maybe you would add an hour. I don't know, I'm just saying, like, I think there's a way to get compliance without taxing our resources.
Just if I could, so I agree, there are two issues here. Number one, we have to do, and that's more on the board level. If it's fines, if it's public outreach, it's something to stop these violations. We see them, I'm telling you, I see it day in, day out on the weekends, and tired of telling people to get their dogs off field. So that issue has to be addressed outside of this committee. I think we're in agreement. Secondly, to Heidi's point is, we're tasked with trying to look at a place and decide, number one, if it's a good idea to recommend as a policy, and number two, where would it be? So I guess I would just start by saying, if I were to have if we were to do it, it would be, like I talked about earlier, some type of controlled environment to begin with, that you'd have to sign up, and that people, and to your point, Fred, they police themselves and figure out a way to control the group. And maybe it would be, I think the suggestion was made Mills. I know we've already talked about Mills. I was part of the original group 13 years ago, I want to say it was, maybe 12, for the Nike site for that off-leash park. And we brought together dog owners and, you know, people in government and, you know, Parks and Forestry. It was a kind of large ranging group. And I think the group at the end raised funds for the fencing, and people with that were in that group have more information, but it was really a community effort to get that. To me, I'm satisfied with that area. I am not a dog owner. But if there is a need for it, and we decide there is, I would like a way to have a pilot, as we talked about, but a really controlled group of responsibility. Because otherwise, I think just having it open to everyone at this time is going to be difficult until we understand how to manage the property.
So back to our pros and cons.
Yep.
I think we have to acknowledge that we've heard from Ed Olson and from Katie with regards to other towns, that there is some additional cost or labor, even if that cost is labor, to clean up the parks, to potentially to enforce, potentially for some new trash receptacles or emptying those receptacles more frequently. So I would think that that would be something that we would want on our list. Potentially there's an issue with parking. One of the things that we've heard, or at least that I've heard throughout this conversation, was that people wanted these areas sort of in their neighborhoods so that they could walk to them. I have to say that that eliminates or reduces the chances of needing parking. People can walk to these areas, but and potentially it reduces the chances of having professional dog walkers, because they'll be a little bit more out of place. But I do think that we need to take into account, like the email that we received today that's talking about someone who wants to walk through their neighborhood, but because their dog is a reactive dog, it means that they can't walk through their own neighborhood because there's a group who gets together there that their dog will react to. So, you know, which could endanger sort of everybody and makes this person feel unable to walk around in their neighborhood. So I think we have to understand the impact of sort of a local program on neighborhoods versus someplace potentially like the town forest, which might have different rules. And so I don't want to bleed into a conversation about where and when, but I do think that there are different settings that we want to consider and talk about pros and cons. So maybe we could try. Does anyone have some pros and cons that they want to throw up on this?
No, I just wanted to sort of maybe piggyback a little on the location. I'm struggling a little on pros and cons versus locations. So like, I'll say, I want to be supportive of this group because I think it's I want to have them have something to try out. But like, for me, I feel personally, the town forest is not the appropriate place.
Okay.
And I think others, I represent other groups probably with that, but I think there's other locations in neighborhoods that this could work at. So I'm struggling a little on pros and cons because I would feel I can do a long list of cons on the town forest, but not very long list on a con of a field, like I'm making Mills up because everybody keeps trying, but I'm not,
Right.
I'm not
Well,
attached to Mills.
So let me ask a question then, like, for example.
So
for
that's
example,
like, that sort of struck, that's
Yeah.
me, I would say.
So one of the things that jumps out to me about fields where there are other activities taking place is that there are other activities taking place. So things like pickleball, which has like people running around
Right. Well, like I
and
drove
boats.
by Webster Street.
I'm assuming dogs off leash with like.
There's a field in Needham Heights on Webster Street. The only thing that's there is a baseball softball diamond that I'm aware of. That's up, no.
Avery.
Okay, so there's no playground, there's no pickleball noise. I'm making it up. I don't know if that would be
Yeah.
appropriate, but I was thinking in my head as I was before this meeting, driving by, that perhaps till 9 o'clock in the morning, you know, from 7 to 9 or whatever, you know, Susan's idea that that would be a place for dogs, that people would know if you don't want to be near the dogs, that's the morning time.
How are people gonna know?
Well, Howard, I mean,
No, this is a question, I'm, like, how would we, how are we, if we decide to move forward with this, how are we gonna publicize it so that people know? I mean, it's just hard to get everyone's attention.
I mean, I think you do public notices, like you do other things. I mean, I don't know. I lived in Brookline, you walked by the parks in the morning until 9 AM and you knew that the dogs were there in the morning and then they cleared out and left. I think people probably get the idea. I mean, there can be signs and things like that. I just have a very different feeling about a controlled space than I do about the town forest, I guess, for example, or what I would call a non-controlled space. And we can put a lot of different spaces in the controlled space, but Cutler Park, for example, is not under Needham's purview, I believe, the town, but I won't go there. I wouldn't go there with my kid when we were little, come around the corner
Dogs everywhere.
and the dog, you know, my dog's friendly and they jump on you and you're muddy and whatever. I mean, there's lots of stories about that, but I just think it's a different environment for dogs than I don't need to go to Avery Park when everybody's there if I don't want to, or I can with my dog. It has a different feel to me. So I think that's sort of I'm struggling a little with generic pros and cons.
Okay, Ed?
Thank you, Heidi. You know, good points made right there. As far as Avery Field and any other location that we all come up with, we need to be mindful of the neighborhood. Avery Field has a condominium association that's attached to it. Norman Jakes, he might be 90 years old, but he calls me every season when he gets back from Florida. Talk about softball, talk about the tree planting, talk about his association, how the field interacts with the town. And I think it's easy for us to pick spots, but wherever we choose, we need to have some collaboration with each and every neighborhood to talk about what that impacts them. So it's easy for us to say Avery town, and I'm completely opposite. I think the town forest is a beautiful spot for dogs to be off leash. Very few people ever go to the forest that I've seen. Avery Field is a neighborhood impact area. So I think, again, we need to be mindful and inclusive of all when we talk about these decisions that impact all of us. So I think great example of Avery Field. I know Norman Jakes personally. I know that he feels that that field is his and that the association's field. They don't want people driving down their driveway. They don't want dogs in that field. They don't want the girls softball in that field, never mind dogs. And I think we all. Sorry. And Norman's a pretty famous guy, if anybody knows him. I mean, he's 92 years old, and God bless us for having Normans of the world, but I think, you know, we have to be mindful of the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thanks, Eddie. I think that's absolutely correct. And I would like to say, you know, if we decide to move forward with this, and I mentioned that in my opinion, we should consider this a pilot. I think that one of the things, first of all, remember that we would be recommending a pilot. We're not instituting a pilot. So, but one of the things that the parameters that would go along with that are, you know, a term limit and some criteria for what the pilot would involve, like what would the rules be, how to evaluate whether or not it was successful, and of course, contacting the neighbors and the abutters, both before and after, and making sure that this is feasible from various perspectives. So just to somewhat address Ed's concern. Stacy?
So I don't know if this will be a favorable comment or not, but I'm looking at our charge, and our charge is to recognize whether or not this is an unmet need. I think from the public hearing, the public thinks it's an unmet need. And from there, we are supposed to look at locations and potential sites for these things, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. Because I think if we, this conversation, if you put in the pickleball frame, could go back and forth. Noise, rules, who's following them, who's not, trash, all of the same things happen. They're just in a more confined area. So I feel like I have feelings both pro and against these ideas. I have worked in a community where we had off-leash dog times. And I've worked in communities where there was no leash law at all. That was crazy town. But I think for this group, like, are we identifying is it an unmet need? And if so, where should we bring it? Because I think, unfortunately for Heidi and Matt, the bylaws and the rules and the regulations start with the select board, potentially go down to whatever owner of that space is, whether it's select board, school committee, park and rec, whatever it is, then make some of the rules and regulations to follow. So I think we can get significantly in the weeds in this conversation. There's a lot of passion one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree with that, Stacy. I'd add too, though, that I think it would be good for this group, you know, if the answer was for a recommendation, no, we wouldn't want you to consider it even at all. Yes, we definitely would, or somewhere in the middle. And it sounded like there was a lot of kind of yes, if, or yes, but, or yes, if you consider. So it is ultimately the select board's decision, and you know, Heidi and Matt both framed that well. I do think this group has spent time and heard public comment, and so doing some of the legwork through this discussion to build out some of that nuance, which we already have way more than we had, you know, 45 minutes ago, is helpful, even though, you know, we could go on and on. I still think it's helpful because in my mind, it's not just yes, and here's locations, it's yes, and here's locations, and here's 10 things we really want you to think about if you were gonna do this. Because I think we've already started to identify those, so I just wanna.
I don't disagree. I mean, I think you're right. I just don't want to go so far into the weeds that we haven't thought about, like, is
Yeah.
this something we want
No, that's
to go
fair.
this way or that?
Definitely.
I just had a thought, Susan's mentioned
Just speak up, so everyone.
the Charter Peninsula. I know that area, and I know trustees of patients owns it, and there are nest boxes there. Is there any way of doing, I mean, it is an open area, and if Charter Peninsula and trustees allows dogs there at the moment, is there any way of joining forces with trustees or reservations? Because it's definitely an off-leash area, the wonderful area. It doesn't bother any neighborhoods. You know, people might have to travel a little bit to get there, but it is along the rail side, the railway. It's right under there.
Yeah, I don't know, but we can certainly investigate it. I guess, I'm,
Strong River Peninsula.
yeah,
Right out, right out, Redmond Bay.
It's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
It's already off leash, yeah, except for.
That's what I'm saying. If needed to join forces and as an off-leash area for you know, needed residents.
Well, anybody can join the trustees and bring the dog out. And
yeah,
But I'm wondering if that would be an answer for needed itself, you know, trying to find
Without being a member.
an open area. Or one. open
I guess what
area.
I've heard from public comment is that the couple of spaces that do exist are not necessarily in sort of denser.
right.
Denser comes with other complications, but I think there's trustees, there's the dog park, and it's not in sort of a walkable area.
I do think that Stacy's point, though, is a valid one.
Right,
Our charge is to determine, is this an unmet need? So I think that's probably the first vote that we should take. Do we feel that this is an unmet need? Because that makes it pretty simple, right?
I would just say, I don't know, Fred, if you want to,
I have questions, but more and more questions.
I guess I can agree it's an unmet need. I just think that we're now kind of in a vacuum where we're talking amongst ourselves without, we had a public hearing, we heard, you know, 3 things were going on, pickleball and dogs. But I would like, now that we have these questions, to hear again from people, because when I heard from Ed now saying, you know what? I would say the town forest would be an awful place personally. But then Ed makes the good point that it might be actually a great place, and especially would help with fields not being used and abused. So I think if we framed it, we heard from the public and they were now saying, you know what? We want to advocate for the more town forest route. We've actually done our research and picked 4 fields that we'd like you to look at. And I think that would really help narrow this group's focus. Because right now, you know, Susan, we have, you know, a dog owner and an advocate, but otherwise, I don't have enough information to decide what fields I think a dog should be in the town forest. I can decide tonight about the unmet need, because I think we should move forward and use this criteria to get answers from people who would like a dog, off-leash dog area, and then take that information and again, pair it then.
I'm a little concerned about how we're gonna consolidate information from dog owners and their chosen spots. I mean, I think it's much easier to have the police here and have Ed Olson here, to say from a organizational perspective, like what works for the town. But I mean, the difference between some of these groups is that like pickleball is a league, and they have a more singular voice, but I think the dog owners have all different needs and live in all different places. Some of them want neighborhood places, some of them want town forest, I mean, which is a more remote location, like the location we kind of already have. I mean, I recognize that it's different, but to some of those objections about the dog person, do you have a suggestion? about
Well, I'm
that?
saying, it would
We've heard from a lot of these.
right, but I think now with this, for example, we've talked about, let's say, creating a group that could use a field at one time. Is that feasible? Do they know about where that's been worked or not worked? Is there more of a gearing towards a pilot in the town forest or a specific field? Is there an appetite for some type of community group to do policing and picking up? I just would want to, and then we make the decision ultimately to be like, okay, we kind of are hearing, we're distilling it into these issues. I just, right now, come up and say, okay, to me, it's just shooting in the dark.
Can I make maybe a suggestion? I wonder, so in our work plan, we have, we're supposed to have one more meeting and then a public hearing with feedback on our draft recommendation and then a final. I wonder if I guess two things. If there's any sites we definitely want to eliminate for recommendation, maybe we should discuss that, but I wonder if the group can say, do you want to recommend categories, small neighborhood parks versus one or two big fields without naming what they are, and trails, so that the public has, does that make sense? So that the public has feedback, can give us feedback at the April 3rd hearing on those categories. But,
So first of all, when you say pilot program, how long are you thinking?
That's part of what
That's part of it, okay, because I didn't know if it like, if you like just speculatively thinking like 6 months, a year, like.
No, but I think we have to let people know what to expect.
Right. Okay, and then to your point, eliminating, I think is helpful, and then. Again, like to this kind of citizens commission type of thing, couldn't we appoint a couple spokespeople who would then do that legwork and get that information from dog owners, especially the ones who are very invested in this, and then report that back in some capacity, like that, you know, again, like just trying to spread the word a little bit.
To Matt's point, basically, you're interested in data collection. So if we find this group that this is an unmet need, do we do some sort of survey? And sometimes I shoot myself suggesting that. But a survey that says like, what are your interests? That's one of the best ways to collect real data that has no emotion behind it. We can look to see, do people want the smaller parks? Do they want the bigger parks? What kind of parks? Where are they? And we can narrow the scope of options to what we want to exclude. Now, does that move this process slightly longer? Maybe, maybe not. It sounds like my feeling about the public hearing is that the dog owners are very passionate. And I'm sure if we get a survey out, they will fill it out. And they will have, you know, comments. I don't know if that makes the most sense. But I agree, we could put a park here, right here, and it will not meet the needs of 90% of the people filling out that form. Now, the data could come back all over the place too, so that it's not cut and dry, that'll help us. But I think having a public hearing and having everybody talk at the same time with the passion is similar. So I'm not really sure.
Susan, did you have something?
As a dog owner, there are a variety of times during the day where I'm doing different types of dog walking. In the morning, I'm getting up, I'm walking down, going to a field and walking her around the field, giving her a ball to play with, you know, whatever. So I'm leash, don't worry about it. And we play there. In mid-morning, we go for a longer walk. She's out in the woods, whether it's, you know, at the town forest or Trustee's property, the Blue Hills, Cutler Park, somewhere. We take a 2-hour walk. Now, and we're walking around in the afternoon. After she's had her little nap, we wake her up, take a walk around the block. And then she's ready for dinner. And then at night, we take another longer walk.
I dropped my Aussie off.
You can take my two dogs off.
So I need all types of different things because dogs need exercise and they need to interact with other dogs and they need to interact with other people to be, you know, happy. I want my dog to be happy, so I want a variety of different options to deal with my dog.
But if you had to prioritize
Yeah,
one, what would it be? You had to prioritize one.
Because we're not gonna, I don't think that there's a chance we're gonna fill all of your
So my,
needs.
from this group here, mornings until 7:30, 8 o'clock on a field close to wherever.
I have talking smaller parks, bigger venues from an enforcement side of it. I'm hearing even the woman that sent in the public comment about the small park, I think it was off of Melrose. There's that little grass area. Not being naive, I understand there are people running their dogs off leash there. You hear people are running their dogs off leash here, off the leash there, so this is my opinion, I'm not speaking for my higher ups or anybody else. It sounds like there might be smaller venues on that sort of time restriction would make more sense because that's when people are running it. And if people are aware that those were the time restrictions, at least now our focus isn't exactly like on a particular park, or people know they can run their dogs at this time, and then if it's off that time, it's a little more focused for us as opposed to all out enforcement.
Thank you. Ed, did you have something else?
I agree with Lieutenant McGrath, what he said, but I just want to add is, you know, I have kids, I don't have dogs. So for me, there's a lot of unmet needs for the town of Needham, a recreation center, a place for our youth to go without vandalizing fields. We have met the need of an off-leash dog park in town. We have the Nike site, so we've already checked that box. Is it enough? We're hearing no, we want more off-leash dog parks, but as far as what Stacy framed, we have an area already that nobody is using. And to me, there's a lot of groups competing for a lot of different interests on our fields and our town and our land, and a lot of groups asking for town support. And to the owner's comment, if you have a dog, it's up to you to figure out where you walk it, how you figure out where you go. It's really not up to the town to figure that out. We've already figured that out and it's not working. So I'm open to conversation, but as far as the framework, unmet needs, we've met this need already. A lot of people have spent a lot of time on this need, hours of our staff, our time, our resources. And what I'm hearing is that's not enough. So there's a lot of needs in town, but this is one that we've already checked that box. Maybe that's not enough. That's value added services from the town of Needham. But we have met this need, and I'm dismayed to hear that's not enough right now for this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. To that, I mean, I also have 5 kids and God, I wish there was a lot more that they could do than what they're doing, but they're like, things like a rec center cost a lot of money, and this feels like something that could potentially be done with little expense to the town, more expense to the dog owners, and we think through it. So in that regard, I wouldn't I wouldn't compare the two. And in terms of needs, like we are a town that tries not just to meet needs, but to make it a place that is like awesome to come to, right? Like we meet the needs, right? Like we've got the school, we've got the parks, we've got the stuff, but now we want like to really make it wonderful. And that means making the people for whatever situations they have, right? Like the pickleball or the skate park, action park, whatever it is, you know, like I think it is important and a value to all residents to see that like that is how we prioritize this town, right? Like we hear your needs and your desires to go, you know, and we will listen and we will see what we can do. So in that regard, whether it be dogs or children or, you know, elderly, whatever it is, like, I think that's a really positive response to people. I also just, and this is a more philosophical question, no one here today needs to answer, but like, why are people breaking things, right? Like, what is causing people to be like, forget you, like, I'm just gonna let my dog run across the Memorial Field at noon on a Sunday, you know, and so like, what causes that, and is that something that we are able to mitigate in some capacity or not? Is it just like society's burning the ground? I don't know, but like, you know, this is not enough to step a dog. It's hard to when you're thinking about how they're policing this. Policing the situation. Why are they not following the rules that we have in place? Is expanding the rules gonna help or not? And does it really matter? And what have you? But it, like, I think if we can do it, why not? Doesn't it? I got it.
All right. We have to
Yeah,
bring this in. So I guess for me personally, I like your suggestion about narrowing from a neighborhood to a large or in between. I mean, typically medium, yeah, but I don't think that was really the choice, like, because town forest isn't just large. and
Mixed use. Yeah.
It's a trail, that's what it is, right?
Right.
Small, large, and trail. It's not, I don't know how feasible it is to do a survey, like not to get people to answer it, but to actually make it up and have that be the data collection point that we could use presumably by our next meeting. Is that a doable?
Yeah,
Even if
yes.
it was just a one question, like, what is your top priority? Choose one.
or
Small
list
neighborhood.
fields, yeah, or list some fields and have people rank them. I know that our timeline was based a lot on town meeting and getting the other things too.
Yeah,
so
yeah. So
If it did push a little, I'd be okay with it.
I mean, personally, I'd rather have the characteristics of the field rather than the name of the field, because I think there are other factors the
Okay,
public's not gonna be aware of.
Yeah, fine.
But so how feasible is it to get a like a 1 or 2 question survey going that we could get an answer?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
We can.
I
And I think it would be,
All right, yeah. Do folks feel like that information from
Sorry to add.
some?
No, I think it's a great idea.
no, I think it's,
We need to get some data points so we can make decisions on this, and I'd also like to see kind of the neighborhood. The problem with dogs, to me, a dog park, you know, a dog, is the noise, right? That we're kind of, if you're in a neighborhood park, it's great for convenience, but also depending on the hours, it can be disruptive, so. Just something to think about too.
would you mind if I asked, just while we have the brain trust, beyond location types and hours, are there other things we should get that you want information on in this survey?
I do have to say, I think the simpler the better,
Yeah,
but
And I would say to really prioritize, like, everybody can't choose.
right, so there's one, you can go, one which is help.
Understand what
You
the
have
rank
categories, you can choose one.
I do think we're like skipping steps, like this is not pickleball, like, right, this is not a contained group where safety is an issue, where waste is an issue, where like kids, there's a lot of issues that we need to consider, and it's not just, can we repurpose a field? It's, should we always have fences? Should we always be looking at the way Needham operates the off-leash rules in general? So I do think before we start going to the full list of location, I think we should like talk to this group about is this something that we want to do? Are there parameters around it? And then do we go to location? So I know that we're going back and forth around priorities, but I do think that there's certain properties that we should determine, are those off the list altogether, and are we open to the safety concerns?
I think, I agree with you. And I think the only thing that I'm thinking about is here we have, like, just in this conversation, we've been talking about, like, is the town forest a likely spot or no? Part of the reason that people aren't using the existing dog park is because it's remote. Not only remote, hard to get to, but there are people who don't feel safe there because there aren't lights or other people around in case of whatever. So I think I totally agree with your point, but I think if we start to talk about what would work, fences, no fences, without understanding what people want, is it gonna work that way?
Yeah, and I guess I think we've heard people want options. They want larger spaces and smaller spaces. So by us saying, do you want a field? That's not gonna accommodate all the requests. I think it's just a combination of issues, and by us narrowing it down to 3 pockets, the answer is gonna be like, yes, yes, yes. We want all of that. So I think the survey is gonna come back to say, every dog owner wants a variety of the 3 that we presented. So I'm just not sure we are going to get the answer that it could be like 33%, 33%. So I just think we have to be open to that. And so we should come in as a recommendation. This is what we are comfortable doing within the confines of what we're hearing from different parts of the community.
You're probably right, and to Katie's point earlier, even in towns that have established dog programs, there was no consensus.
So I don't know what the survey is going to, like, I just don't know if we're gonna get what we need from the survey. I think we've had a lot of feedback around, they want something local, which having a pilot at Mills probably won't solve. So is even the pilot program addressing the needs, the unmet needs? I'm not sure that.
Right, but if the need is everything all at once, we're not gonna meet that need either. So we have to make some choices, and we're looking for some criteria on which to base those choices, other than us just deciding. So I hear your point, but I'm not sure, tell me what you think would be a better.
Well, I think determining if there's consensus within this group, or at least recommendations that we say, are we open to having dogs off leash? Overall, like, is that something that we even want to address as a group? If we are, great. If we are not, what are some of the restrictions that we would want to put in place in order to feel comfortable with that? Do we want to use fields that Eddie's spending a lot of money in the group to maintain for an additional use? Or do we want to look at spots that are not used for fields and that are, untapped pocket parks? So that's very different, I think, than existing athletic fields in terms of maintenance and safety and kids stepping into. So I think that there's just different criteria we could place on existing locations. Okay.
My thoughts are, I hear you saying, my thought was, if we're gonna do a pilot program, we can't do a pilot program in 10 different places all over town, but we can't quantify or find out any information from that. So if we go to, my thought for the survey was like, what is the priority of like, okay. 35% of the people want a large open space for their dog to run. Okay, then we can focus on the rules, the fence, the this, the that, because I think having a pilot all over the place makes it cumbersome for whoever has to follow that.
Right. Okay, good time.
If I may help the group narrow that down. Just thoughts for the group. The most conversation we've had on the police department side with this is Pollard Middle School, DeFazio Field. You have a school, a mixed use field, a tennis court, all available in that area to a group that I know wants to utilize that area. That could be a starting point. Because it has multi-mediums. To touch on, instead of just throwing
Yeah.
darts at a
Yeah.
couple of.
Well, it does already have a user group,
Does.
so I suppose that would make sense.
I totally agree with that. What I was thinking previously, first of all, I've heard some terrible incidents in the town force. It's just too uncontrolled. Unleashed dogs are running around. Some owners are leashing their dogs that just don't react very well with unleashed dogs. But that's besides the point. I feel that there should be, it should come from us, maybe 4 sites. And definitely what you mentioned, and maybe 3 more to put out there. And see what comes back. I mean, I
Put
think it
out
should
there,
come from us.
to put out there in terms of.
Yes, it could be a survey, the public hearing. I just feel it should kind of come from us to get the ball rolling, to say, we have this that could be possible, or this, say 4 sites. And just to kind of
Mhm.
get the ball rolling.
I think we need to decide, take a vote on whether or not we want to move forward with this. We want to recommend that this is something that we're going to investigate, the times and places to follow. But we need to just affirm or not whether we're all on board with this as a policy.
And then if I could add to that, once we do, I think, and I'm looking at the hour, I think if now that we have these comments, we can go and kind of narrow down and kind of bring some ideas for discussion next meeting and say, here's my top 3, and kind of have that discussion at that time. I will say, in hearing all of this, to Ed's point, we do have a place already, as we know, that has a certain use. So to me, this, if we're going to do something else, it would have to be kind of different than that, not only in location, but maybe if you want the bigger park, you go out this with this type of, terrain. Otherwise, if you want the smaller park or medium park, it's more, feel something different, because I think we are satisfying the use there. We're just not satisfying the use for all users. So I would want it to be different in size or terrain than what we currently have. But to your point, I think we need to move forward and say, is this an unmet need? We're going to move forward. I just see Fred.
I just have some other information that I think could help us. I don't know which stage it would help us, but like from Ted, if we could hear, like, what are the types of things that his department would have to remediate if this all goes out? And what are the types of things that as users, they could get together and like picking up poop from a field where people let in all this go, user group can do that. Reseeding the field because it got torn up is not something the user group could do, right? And, then you think about different costs, like we just increase cost, like what I'm saying, but like checking to see like what is realistic to expect the user group to take care of themselves, like to your point, like I don't want to go at like dogs are there till 9 and then at 9:05 soccer starts and you're cleaning poop up.
That's right.
Right, so I think that's a valid point, but if we do have the user group and that is mandated and this entire program hinges on their taking care of it, whether it's their dog or not, then maybe it's, anyway. But that's the kind of information I want, and same thing with the police department, like citizens could say, okay, you're off leash and you're not supposed to be here, and that's like the citizens committee that I keep going back to. But a dangerous dog, that would not be something that would be police department stuff. So wondering like kind of along those lines, what could be managed by the user group and what would require town resources?
Ed, do you have any recommendations? I know you said the town forest. Do you have a couple or for next meeting?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. What I'm hearing tonight is we have a dog park. We want value-added services. We want closer dog parks for more neighborhoods. So my recommendation tonight, motion to the committee tonight, would be to recognize spots that are across Needham that would be equidistant to each other, that would offer amenities to various groups. So my offer tonight would be to recommend Mills Field, the Tree Grove at Mills Field. Melrose Ellicott Park, as Lieutenant McGrath elaborated in his email, or we saw today in an email from a resident, that this is already a de facto dog park already. Neighborhood dog park. So I'm recommending 4 dog parks, the Nike site, which we have already. Colton Park, which I think is DCR, which people are already using as a dog park. Millsfield and Ellicott Park. And I think between those 4 locations, you've traversed the whole town of Needham. You've given 4 options for people to use that we could regulate. And what I'm trying to go back to is police response, DPW response is, if we give 4 locations, there's no excuse anymore for the dog poop at Cricket Field or the neighbor to say to people, here's what we're presenting. Please use these amenities, these value-added amenities, so that we can nip in the bud the daily occurrences that happen every day with our park staff. We've heard everybody here tonight say, I've seen dogs off leash at DeFazia, Memorial, Cricket, everywhere. We need to control this. It's a need, it's a value-added service. And I don't think there's any room for, if we give these options, there's no room for seeing these flagrant violations every day. Police is spending too much time on it. My staff is spending too much time on it. The park ranger is spending too much time on it. Let's have a pact with the community that this is what we're going to do. These are the options that we're going to offer. And after that, you got to take it or leave it, because we can't have battles every neighborhood and pick up poop in every neighborhood, because it's just not fair to the staff. So thank you, Matt, for asking me my opinion. I think we need to represent every neighborhood in town, and we need to offer 4 locations. And one of them, thankfully enough, is a DCR location where I walk all the time with my family, and I occur dogs off leash, pit bulls. My son is afraid of dogs. Nothing worse than walking at Colton Park and seeing a pit bull come at you 300 yards off leash and have an owner tell you, don't worry, he's friendly. That's not fair. That's not fair to the people that don't have dogs. And I think we need to be fair to everybody and inclusive of all. And I think that would be my proposition tonight, is give a couple locations. I think we're going back to locations and options, but I think we need to be mindful that we have an option already. It's not enough. We want to hear from people and offer more locations, but I think we need to nip in the bud the flagrant abuse that we're seeing day to day with the police and fire and all of us that have to pick up after these people that don't really care about what the rules are. They're going to do what they're going to do.
Right, no, I understood, absolutely, and so Cutler Park, that is DCI, you're right, Eddie, that's, I forgot about that one.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry, but you can email out to the board afterwards on,
OTM.
OTM sorry.
OTM at needhamma.gov.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, OTM, Office of Town Manager.
so are we thinking of, we have 4 recommendations from Ed, do you want to table that as we look through this for
I
next
think
meeting?
table the location,
Yeah, and move,
and we just clarify the group's feelings about moving forward with
Yeah.
this policy.
okay.
Could you take a vote?
So I would move that we find there is an unmet need in the town for an off-leash area and pursue the option of a pilot at a to be determined location that this committee will recommend.
Do we have a second? Yeah. Yeah, second, okay, so we're gonna take a vote, affirmative vote says that we will find that there is an unmet need and move along to the discussion of locations. Aye. 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 Okay, John, oh, John, sorry.
Nay.
Okay.
And let me just speak to that if I can. I think it's an unmet need. I don't consider it to be an unmet recreational need. And that's how I view our charter, is to address recreational matters. And so for that reason, that's why I'm voting no.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John.
All right, so, homework
Yeah.
then.
Homework.
Homework. For our next meeting, we're gonna look through this list. I'd love for everyone to eliminate as well as propose. There, say 4 locations that we think might work. Stacy?
I'm just gonna put right on the table, the turf fields are absolutely eliminated.
Yes,
Okay. Just
Yeah,
that
that's a
using
baseline.
any money that is.
yeah, you can't take your dog on the turf field, leash or unleash, so that's.
Could you name them for those who might not know?
That would be Memorial Football / multi-purpose field, Memorial Softball Field, and DeFazio Brock and DeFazio Founders.
So I will just add that those are the 2 fields in the bylaw that are identified as restricted areas where dogs aren't allowed, period, leash or no leash. So,
Okay.
And as was mentioned, we will be taking public emails from now until our next meeting to help
Yes.
us with that.
Yes, so I'll just repeat that email address, OTM, like office town manager, at needhamma.gov. Please email your comments, locations, preferences, whatever. Be happy to look at them. And members of the working group will come with their preferences for locations / times / whatever else we have to say. Next meeting.
survey or no survey? Between now and next meeting.
Well,
Does it hurt to do a survey?
well, it's
Find out.
staff time and hours and publicizing it and then reconciling the data. I mean,
I think the question is, would it be useful and would it inform your decision, to know?
I think it would be helpful.
right, and you think it's feasible? Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, all right,
And thank you.
thank you
Stacy.
for that.
I just volunteered to do it.
I'm curious, like,
Well-
you're worried about staffing, I should not be the help, but I have nothing else going on.
Yes.
Okay, so preferences and then we'll do the very short survey. All right, anything else?
No, we adjourn.
Wait. Item number 3 says, meeting on this day or this day.
Oh, sorry, that was depending on how far along we got in this meeting.
How do we do?
We're gonna meet on March 22nd.
Oh.
I'm just being wildly optimistic.
Headlines.
Yes.
Nope, just thorough.
Right.
Thank you for raising that.
Okay, so we have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Okay,
Yes.
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 Done.
Whatever.
Yes.
Excellent. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.